Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really important part of Philippine elections, but one that can sometimes seem a bit confusing. It's about what happens when a candidate decides, to drop out.
Right, withdrawal. And then, crucially, can someone else step in? Substitution.
Exactly. It's like trying to figure out the rules when a player suddenly leaves the field mid-game. Who comes off the bench and under what rules?
That's a good way to put it. We're going to unpack the legal side of this withdrawal and substitution, really get into the mechanics of it so you can see how it actually functions.
And we've been digging into the main sources for this. We've got the Omnibus Election Code, that's Batas Pambansa 881.
Yep, the foundational law.
Republic Act 7166, and also the specific rules that COMELEC, the Commission on Elections, puts out.
Those COMELEC resolutions are key. They often clarify the nitty-gritty details.
Our goal here is pretty straightforward. We want to make it clear when and why a candidate might pull out, who can actually replace them. The deadline's always important in elections. And well, the big role political parties play in all of this.
So if you're interested in Philippine elections, or maybe you're just curious about how different election systems handle these kinds of curveballs,
then stick around. This is your shortcut to getting informed. Let's kick things off with the first step, a candidate deciding to withdraw.
Okay, so withdrawal at its core is just a candidate formally saying, I'm out. I'm not running anymore. Section 73 of the Omnibus Election Code covers this.
Right, and it's not just saying it, is it? There's a process. They need to file a written statement.
Yes, exactly. A written declaration of withdrawal, and it has to be sworn. So it's official.
Under oath?
Under oath. And they file it the same place they file their original certificate of candidacy, their COC. Think of it like formally canceling their registration for the race.
And timing matters here, right? You can't just do it whenever.
Definitely not. The absolute deadline is before Election Day. Once the polls open, it's too late to withdraw.
What I find interesting is that the law doesn't actually require them to say why.
No, it doesn't. Personal reasons, strategic moves, health, it could be anything. Legally, they don't need to justify the withdrawal itself.
But withdrawing isn't without consequence. It's pretty final, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Once that sworn withdrawal is filed and accepted, that's generally it. They can't just change their mind a week later and say, I'm back in.
Okay.
And importantly, they can't just slot themselves in as a replacement for another candidate unless we're talking very specific party nomination scenarios, which we'll get to.
Which leads us nicely into substitution, because a withdrawal doesn't always mean that spot just vanishes.
Exactly. Substitution is the legal mechanism for filling that spot when a candidate withdraws, or if they unfortunately pass away, or if they get disqualified after filing their COC.
And the rule book for this is mainly Section 77 of the Omnibus Election Code.
That's the main one, yes. And again, COMELEC resolutions add detail and procedures based on that section.
So you mentioned withdrawal, death, or disqualification. Those are the triggers for potential substitution.
Those are the main scenarios, yes. And the rules can differ slightly depending on which of those happened.
Okay, but one thing is constant, right? The position. If someone withdraws from a mayoral race,
their substitute must also run for mayor. Correct. You can't substitute sideways or upwards, like putting in a vice mayoral candidate for a governor slot. It has to be for the exact same position.
Makes sense. And the person coming in as the substitute, they don't just inherit the spot automatically. They have their own paperwork.
Absolutely. They have to file their own certificate of candidacy. It needs to be, properly filled out, meet all the requirements, just like any other candidate.
And presumably filed within a certain time frame?
Yes. Within the period COMELEC sets for substitutions. So the substitute essentially becomes a candidate in their own right through this process.
Now, this can happen quite late in the game sometimes, maybe even after ballots are printed. How does COMELEC handle that, making sure voters know who they're actually voting for?
That's a huge responsibility for COMELEC. They have to publicize any substitutions. It's vital for transparency. They use official lists, media announcements, whatever they can.
It must be a challenge, though, if the ballots already list the original candidate.
It is. Sometimes they instruct electoral boards on how to count votes cast for the original candidate as votes for the substitute. But transparency beforehand is always the goal.
Okay, let's zoom in on substitution specifically because someone withdrew. This seems to be where political parties really come into the picture.
Yes, very much so. Generally speaking, if a candidate withdraws voluntarily, the option to substitute is primarily available only if that candidate belonged to a political party.
Ah, so it's a party privilege in a way.
We could see it like that. If a candidate from Party X withdraws, Party X usually gets the chance to nominate someone else to fill that slot.
But there are rules, I assume. It can't just be anyone from the party stepping in whenever they feel like it.
No, definitely not. There are clear conditions. First, the person who withdrew must have been a member of that registered political party. That's condition 1.
Okay.
Second, the person being put forward as the substitute must also be a member of the same political party.
Right. Same team. You can't have someone from Party Y substituting for Party X's candidate.
Exactly. It maintains the party's slate. And third, timing again. There's a deadline.
Set by Kamala.
Yes. Kamala sets a deadline specifically for substitutions due to withdrawal. It's often linked to the end of the initial COC filing period, or sometimes a bit later. But the substitute's own COC has to be filed by that substitution deadline.
Okay, that's clear for party candidates, but what about independents? You know, candidates running without any party affiliation, what if they withdraw?
That's a really crucial distinction. If an independent candidate withdraws, they cannot be substituted, period.
No substitution at all.
None. Their withdrawal simply reduces the number of candidates for that position. There's no mechanism to replace an independent who steps down voluntarily.
Wow, okay. That really highlights the structural advantage, or at least the different mechanism available to political parties in this specific situation.
It does. It underscores the role of the party as an entity in the electoral process.
All right, let's shift gears slightly. What about the other triggers? Death or disqualification? Are the substitution rules different then?
Yes, there's a key difference in the timing. If a candidate dies or is disqualified, the substitution can happen much later.
Later than the deadline for withdrawal substitutions.
Much later.
Yeah.
Potentially right up until midday on Election Day itself.
Really? Midday on Election Day?
Yes, but there's a condition.
Yeah.
The death or the final disqualification order must have occurred after the deadline for filing the initial COCs had already passed.
Okay, so it's for events that happen late in the process, and disqualification that can cover a few things.
Right. It could be because they fundamentally don't meet the requirements, citizenship, residency, age, things like that. Or it could be due to committing election offenses.
And it has to be a final decision, like no more appeals pending.
Exactly. The disqualification needs to be final and executory.
And for substitution, in these cases, death or disqualification, does the substitute still need to be from the same party?
Yes, absolutely. The rule remains. The substitute must belong to the same political party as the candidate who died or was disqualified. Kamala checks this. Party affiliation is still central.
So we have these laws, these sections in the code, the Kamlik rules, but laws often get interpreted, right? Especially in politics. Has the Supreme Court weighed in on this?
Oh, definitely. There have been numerous cases reaching the Supreme Court, often involving internal party squabbles about who the legitimate substitute is, or challenging last-minute substitutions.
And what's the general trend from the court?
The court usually emphasizes strict adherence to the rules, especially the deadlines and the party affiliation requirements. They try to uphold the framework laid out in the law and by Kamala.
And Kamalik itself keeps refining things with new resolutions.
Yes. As new situations or potential loopholes emerge, Kamala issues resolutions to clarify how the rules on withdrawal and substitution should be applied. These resolutions are legally binding and aim to adapt the system while maintaining integrity.
It feels like there's a balancing act here. On one hand, you need some flexibility for unexpected events, maybe even some political strategy.
True.
But on the other hand, you need to protect the election process itself from being, well, chaotic or easily manipulated.
That's precisely the tension. The rules try to balance allowing parties continuity if a candidate drops out unexpectedly, while preventing, say, placeholder candidates or chaotic last-minute swaps designed purely to confuse voters or game the system.
And the consistent theme seems to be the importance of the political party structure in this specific area.
Without a doubt. The rules heavily rely on party membership and nomination, which, as we noted, puts independent candidates in a fundamentally different position regarding substitution after withdrawal.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up for everyone listening. What are the absolute key things to remember about withdrawal and substitution in Philippine elections from our chat today?
All right, key takeaways. 1, withdrawal is voluntary, needs a sworn statement, must happen before Election Day, and is generally irreversible.
Got it.
2, substitution depends on the reason. If it's due to withdrawal, it's mainly for party candidates. The sub must be from the same party and filed by a specific deadline.
And crucially,
independent candidates who withdraw cannot be substituted. That's a big one.
Okay. And if it's due to death or disqualification?
If death or final disqualification happens after the COC filing deadline, substitution by a same-party member can occur much later, even up to midday on Election Day.
So when you step back and look at these rules, what does it all mean for how elections play out in the Philippines?
Well, it adds a layer of strategic complexity for political parties. They need contingency plans. It also means the candidate list isn't always final until very close to the election, or sometimes even on the day itself.
Which could impact voters.
It could. It emphasizes the strength of established parties that have the organization and pool of members to manage substitutions effectively. And it raises questions about the hurdles faced by independents.
Right, which leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given these rules, especially the power vested in political parties for substitution and the limitations on independence, how do you think this system shapes the choices voters face? Does it create stability by ensuring party representation continues, or does it perhaps limit fluidity and make it harder for non-party actors? What are the pros and cons for the average voter when the candidate list can change significantly, sometimes at the last minute? Something to definitely think about next time you follow a Philippine election cycle.
Indeed. Lots to consider there.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.